Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Joffrey Noodle Legs here today with little Sullivan, the doggy. This week we are looking at Alfred Hitchcock films this week. So this is the Alfred Hitchcock week. So we're going to be reviewing 3 or so movies. He wants to come and say hello. Here he comes. Here he is. Here he is. Hello everybody. He's just been in the bath with me. Every time I have a bath, he jumps in. That's why he's a bit wet looking. Because it's my day off work today. So I've just had a little bath. You jump down there, mate. Good boy. Yeah, so we're looking at Alfred Hitchcock movies. And primarily we're looking at the some from the retrospective collection, which I have on Blu-ray. So today, let's have a look. Let's show you which one we're going to be looking at. This is cool. It's like a book. Let's go through some of these. We're going to be looking at this one, Rear Window, starring Grace Kelly and James Stewart. I do class this as kind of like a horror film, just because it's got some sort of like horror sort of aspects to it. It can be a bit of a horrible story. It's quite a gentle film. It's a very, very slow burn film, so be wary of that. It starts off, it's about James Stewart, who's supposed to be like a famous photographer, and he's laid up. We see a view from his apartment over the other apartments in this sort of like complex area, and we see this sort of like view of all these different sort of people, like in this sort of like this apartment sort of a block, and he is actually laid up at the moment from work because he's broken his leg. So we sort of see him kind of sleeping. After we do have about 3 or 4 minutes of like seeing some of the neighbours first, and then we cut to James Stewart kind of sleeping, and it sort of reveals that he's got a broken leg in plaster of Paris. I think he's done this by doing one of his photography jobs, because he's like supposed to be like a famous magazine photographer, where he goes out and does sort of like really sort of like out of this world sort of photography, you know, like Formula One photography or wildlife photography, all this kind of thing. He's like an adventurer sort of photographer, and he's sort of like in his apartment, and he's kind of bored, and he's been spending the weeks watching his neighbours. And some of his neighbours there, he's got like a pianist who sort of lives opposite him. He's got a couple that tend to sleep on their balcony, and he's got like a ballet dancer, and there's a salesman and his wife who live sort of like a bit lower, and there's like an old woman with a dog, like a sort of chihuahua, lives on the top floor. And there's all these sort of like wonderful characters that we see to sort of like get to know over the film, but don't get to know, if you know what I mean. But you do sort of get to know them, and you start to feel for them a little bit. Anyway, he's sort of laid up, and he gets a visit from his insurance company's nurse. And she turns up and starts talking to him about why he's not getting married, because he's got a girlfriend who's played by Grace Kelly, and he's saying he doesn't never want to get married. He doesn't want to be tied down, and she's not the one, sort of thing. And they sort of have a discussion about that, and she sort of moans at him about staring out the window, out of like at the ballet dancer, and there's all these kind of things going on. And he sort of keeps her up to date with what some of the sort of people are doing in their flat. So it's like a little sort of soap opera within a movie. And he sort of tells her what's kind of like what they've been doing and what's happening. And he seems to be really interested in the comings and goings of people. Especially when he watches like the salesman and his wife. They seem to argue quite a bit. She I don't know if she's ill, but she's in bed quite a lot. and he tends to be watching them because something probably just doesn't feel right. And like, there's one incident when the salesman's on the phone, maybe to another woman or whatever, and the wife's in the next room and she hears him and comes in. They start arguing and stuff like that. So he's sort of like really getting involved with people's sort of personal lives by observation skills. So although you see, and this is the thing, isn't it? Because what you see is not always what it is. And I think this is what the film is trying to demonstrate to you. By what you see in doesn't necessarily mean what it is that's going on. And in the evening, we sort of cut to Grace Kelly arriving. And she's an absolute beautiful woman. She really was. And she sort of turns up and she's sort of like all over him and like that. She's really, really in love with James Stewart, and he's really kind of like quite cold and distant to her. And they sit and have dinner and stuff like that. And I think she's supposed to be like some sort of fashion designer, and she's like very popular, and she's everything about her's perfect. You know, everything she does is perfect, and I think that's what puts him off. Is that everything she does is sort of perfect, and she's perfect. She's lovely, she's nice, and all this, and that tends to put him off, which I don't get. I don't get it, people. Why people are like that? If you've got someone who's perfect for you, then you hang on to them. But yeah, she's kind of like perfect, and they start arguing because it sort of comes out that he does not want a commitment, and she wants him to do photography for fashion, and he doesn't want to do that. He says, and he doesn't think she'll be able to cope with going around the world and dealing with all this sort of wild lifestyle where they have to eat sort of like wild food and things like this, and he's trying to sort of like put her off. Anyway, she sort of leaves with the ump, and he's sort of like, I think he starts contemplating about it, and he starts watching outside the window again, and he sees our salesman. And it's like midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, like every hour. He's seen the salesman come home, going out with a case of things, and it grows his suspicion. And then he falls asleep, and he's woken up by like a scream and a noise, and it's like all the sort of curtains are drawn in the salesman's flat, and then the salesman seems to be on his own after this, so he thinks he's murdered his wife. All sort of things point to it, and so he sort of like starts telling the nurse and his partner, who don't really believe him at first, and his friend from the magazine he works at comes and visits him, and he tells him, and then they start to believe him, and they start seeing all these sort of strange things happening. And the old woman upstairs with the dog gets killed by someone in the flats. So it all's pointing around to the salesman that he's actually, committed a murder. So it's sort of like all based around that. And whilst we're seeing that story, we're still watching the stories and lives of the other people in the other flats. There's one woman downstairs who's got like an imaginary sort of like, she's really lonely, I think. I think maybe she might have lost someone, but she's very lonely. She has pretend dinner parties with a guy who's never there, and then you see her break down, and it's all this sort of kind of thing going on. And they find stuff buried in the garden, which they think is the woman's clothes that's in the that's the salesman's wife's clothes that are buried in the garden. That's why he killed the dog, because the dog was digging the garden. But is she dead? You need to watch it and find out, because that's all I'm going to tell you. It's a very slow burn film. What do I think of it? I think it's a great film, really, really cool. Like I said, it is a really slow burn film, but it's a very clever film though as well, because it all takes place from his view outside to what's going on outside. And it's sort of like, is it cabin fever that's playing with his head? You know, you kind of like you start to think, oh, is this really happening, or is he just got cabin fever, and his mind's working it? But then others start to believe him, his partner and everything, and they start like helping him by going out and investigating. Like his partner goes into the flat of the salesman later in the film. I don't want to give too much away because it's really suspenseful. But yeah, it's a very, very cool film. A very unexpected sort of film by Alfred Hitchcock. I still look at it as a horror film because it's kind of like a kind of whodunit. I suppose a little bit of a home invasion, if you like, because he is invading his home, these people's home, by him watching. He's watching through binoculars and through his cameras. He's watching his people, and it's like, wow, it's like a peeping tom kind of film. And it's like, and it's quite scary by not actually knowing these people, what is actually going on in every household, and it makes you think about your own neighbourhood, your own street. I wonder what's going on around here. Nothing, but you could imagine, couldn't you, what's going on in those flats opposite? You know, I'm sure you hear people arguing and stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, it's kind of an eye-opener of a film, and I really enjoyed it. It is very slow, though. It's not an action-packed film. You know, there is a great turn, you know, at the end, which again I won't tell you. Really, really cool film. The pluses of the film, the transfer on this Blu-ray is superb. I do already own it on Blu-ray on my steel book, which I will be giving to my lad Lemon Lord. He will inherit it, but I've now got it in this sort of box set of loads of classic movies, and we're going to be reviewing a couple more out of this throughout this week. The transfer is great. The cast is amazing. James Stewart is excellent. He's starred in quite a few Alfred Hitchcock movies, but he's such a good actor. I really love James Stewart. And Grace Kelly has got a real sort of screen presence. She's a real sort of a screen sort of beauty, you know, and she's amazing in the film. And it also stars Raymond Burr, who played Ironside. So yeah, so and it's a really stellar sort of cast, and it's shot. The photography is amazing. The way like you can be watching in like what's going on in this house, but in the corner you can see there's like an alleyway that goes and there's a cafe at the end, and you can see people in the cafe like talking and drinking coffee and stuff. And it's thinking it's so clever. It's really well shot, absolutely captivating. You're just watching it, you know, and you just think, wow, this is so cool. And it's that sort of film. Really love it. I'm going to score the film a excellent watch and give it an 8 out of 10. I can't give it any more, although it's a classic Hitchcock film. I can't give it any more because it does lack sort of suspense and sort of like that kind of suspense and drama in a sense, because it's all based in one room, you know, and one view. But then that kind of adds to the terror of the film, because, and especially when he's laid up with his leg and he can't do nothing about it, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a great, great film. Rear Window, 8 out of 10. Any of you guys seen it? If you have, let me know down below what you thought of it. I thought it's really, really cool. I love Hitchcock films because they're all so different and they've all got a really weird twist to it. He's got a really weird twist to his films. He's touched on loads of genres, the horror genre, which we'll look at tomorrow in one of his films. Well, it might not be tomorrow, but the next film I review is going to be one of his horror movies. We're going to be looking at The Birds. So, and he's done so many sort of genres. You know, he's done film noir films, all sorts of things, like Strangers on a Train. It's a fantastic film. Really cool, sort of like film noir, sort of murder film. Amazing, amazing films. Really, really cool. Anyway, guys, until the next one, which will be in a few days' time, you look after yourselves. You look after one another, and I really hope I'll see you all soon.